Hey everyone, it is Thursday, April 10, 2014. I'm Rene Ritchie, and right now we're going to make our hearts bleed, and we're going to look at roadmaps that make our eyes cry. This is the iMore Show. Joining me, as always, the managing editor of iMore.com and Internet Bon Vivant, Peter Cohen. How are you, Peter?
I am doing well, Rene. How are you today?
I'm doing really well. Actually, I have to apologize to everyone. I've had a bit of a chest cold, so my voice is going to sound funny for the remainder of the show. So if you're listening on audio only, it really is me. It is just a congested me. That out of the way, I wanted to start off, Peter, because this OpenSSL vulnerability that was discovered, I in no way can properly describe it. I am not Nick Arnott, nor can I play Nick Arnott on TV. But this, at least at first blush, looks really, really bad.
There should be a new game show, Nick or Not.
Well, I saw Miguel de Acaiza, who we had the good fortune of having on Debug previously, was saying, oh, what happened to all the open source and Linux guys making fun of OS X security vulnerabilities? What? I don't hear anything all of a sudden.
Yeah. Now, this is really interesting because just about 2 months ago, about a month and a half ago, I guess, it was discovered that iOS and Mavericks had an SSL TLS vulnerability, a vulnerability in the technology around encryption, data encryption on those platforms. But today, this week, we're in the midst of another brouhaha about that same technology, only this doesn't have anything to do with the Mac at all. This is the rest of the world. OpenSSL is open source software that's used to manage this encryption on many different websites, on many different services, internet services, email service providers, media streaming content. There is a lot of stuff that uses OpenSSL. To make sure that you are who you say you are, and to make sure that your data is sent securely.
So let me just make sure I get this right. Does that mean that, for example, if I'm connecting to my bank, it allows me to know that it's really my bank, and also that there's no one sitting in between, basically eavesdropping on that communications?
That's exactly right. In a perfect world, that's how it would work. This Heartbleed vulnerability, this hack, enables people to actually look at your data, decrypt it, and know what it is, and get in the way. So it's very dangerous. Not something that we have to worry about on the Mac, not something we have to worry about on iOS, and not something we have to worry about with iCloud specifically, but obviously people use their Macs for a lot of other stuff besides that. So, for example, I'm an IFTTT user, if this, then that. I just got an email from them yesterday saying, by the way, you've been logged out, log back in. There was this OpenSSL exploit thing that we fixed. I know a few other services have sent emails out to their subscribers.
We logged back into Trello, all of us this morning.
That's right. Yeah, we use Trello for our own editorial stuff here at iMore.
I got an email from Synology telling me that they're going to be updating today or tomorrow.
So, my advice is be ready to change your password, but not too quickly. Change your password after you know your service providers for everything that you use have patched the OpenSSL exploit if it is indeed something that affects them.
Well, I know everyone at Mobile Nations, our entire tech team, from Marcus Adelson, our CEO, down, spent, as soon as the exploit was discovered, they spent the next little while fixing and upgrading and patching everything. But that's the key thing to me here. Like, I had lunch with my mother today, and she heard about it on the radio, and she just didn't know. Should I change my passwords? When should I change them? Is my bank card vulnerable? Do I have to change the PIN number on my bank card? There's a general sort of scare, not scare is not the right word, but there's a lot of information but a lack of actionable information for many people, because to your point, we don't know who's fixed. We have some idea who's fixed it, but we don't know everybody who's fixed it, so changing our password now might mean nothing when they actually fix it in a week.
Yeah, and that's an excellent point. The fact is, it's going to be kind of a work in process to figure out who's affected by this and who it isn't. Or who isn't, rather. But one thing that we know for sure is that the change isn't going to come in the form of any kind of software update that you're going to install that Apple's going to distribute, because Apple systems simply aren't affected by this.
Yeah, so I mean, the important thing here is I don't think, for example, that I'm a high-profile Hydra target or Peter's a high-profile Hydra target, but you just don't know. You can never, if you don't know whether or not your data has been compromised, the only sane response is to assume your data has been compromised and to change whatever you have to change accordingly. And there are tools like 1Password and LastPass that make it easier to change large amounts of passwords, or at least generate large amounts of new passwords and store them for you. But it really is going to be a pain in the ass for everybody.
And fortunately, they're not affected by the OpenSSL problem either, so you don't have to worry about, if you're already a 1Password user, about the security of your passwords.
Yeah, that's the tricky thing, though. I think that's where most of the misunderstanding comes from. So, for example, if you say, like, Mac isn't affected, which means that if you're running a Mac server, your server is fine because they're not using OpenSSL. But if you're a Mac user going to IFIT or going to Facebook maybe, or going to any of these services, those services might have the issue, so you're still affected. So there's no assumption of safety here, which I think is what makes this so stressful for everybody.
This is very true.
So for now, all we can say is you will likely have to, it will likely be prudent for you to change your passwords for services like IFIT or Synology or Trello. For the ones that have notified you that they've already fixed it and reset your login, you should reset your password to go along with it. For services you don't know about, try contacting them, especially if they're very high value and contain a lot of high value information for you. Otherwise, you're going to have to just wait and see an update as they do.
Here's the thing, rotating passwords, changing passwords in general is good hygiene. So you should be in the habit of changing your passwords periodically for everything that you use. I know it's a pain in the butt. I know iCloud Keychain isn't the perfect solution. Neither is 1Password. Neither are any of the other password management systems out there. But it's something that absolutely needs to get done because problems like this are always going to happen. This isn't the first time we've heard about this sort of vulnerability appearing, and it's not going to be the last. So consider making new passwords part of your normal regimen of computer use.
Absolutely. I know when I worked in IT, we were forced to change our password every month, and the password had to be highly dissimilar to the previous month's password, actually the previous 6 months or 1 year or whatever of passwords. I don't know if I'd say you have to do it every month, Peter, but maybe every couple months, every few months, once a quarter.
Once a quarter is usually what I do. And look, you don't need to make it. You don't need to make an elaborate or have to develop an elaborate workflow for this, right? You can buy a simple lined notebook that you keep by your desk and write these passwords down, because these passwords, for the most part, aren't there to keep people out who are breaking into your home, getting ready to steal your computer. These passwords are to keep hackers in China and Russia and other places away from your sensitive data. So as far as I'm concerned, you should, if you have trouble remembering what your passwords are, there is no harm and no foul in just writing them down on a piece of paper someplace and keeping that handy when you need it.
Now, what I do is I take a rare book and I create a cipher based on a simple replacement mechanic, and then I hide that in a bookshelf with a secret passage on, because that way only Sherlock Holmes will ever be able to get to my passwords.
I think that's wise in your particular case, Rene, because you're an evil robot that's here to take over the world. But for the rest of us mortals, it's probably okay.
Yeah. All right. So moving along, I don't know how to talk about this, Peter, because I find it both amusing and frustrating. But yesterday, Ming-Chi Kuo, who's a financial analyst, released his Apple roadmap for 2014, something he's done for many years. He is a financial analyst. He tends to be less sensationalistic and a tad more reliable than your Chip Chuddery kind of financial analysts, to put a name to it. But still, a lot of the stuff, to me at least, isn't really information. It's more sort of assumption, no less or more valuable than anyone else's. But it got an incredible amount of attention. This year, I think most people blog it. Some sites put up a blog for every bullet post in the thing. More power to them. Big surface area, but I think there's no value in those rumors. I think the value is in analyzing those rumors. So I went back and I looked at 2013, and 2013, a lot of people thought they were highly reliable, but I must be missing something, because, for example, there was an Apple TV refresh on there, never happened. Mac Mini refresh in there, never happened. New Mac Pro wasn't on there. There were new iPhones and iPads, but almost anyone can guess new iPhones and iPads every year. That's fairly predictable. There was a refresh for the iPod Touch, which never happened. They just got the new space gray color. Refresh for the iPod Nanos never happened. They just got the new space gray color. And there was a redesign for the Retina MacBook Pros that never happened. So if I use that as a filter, maybe it hit around 40% accuracy, but most of those things were highly predictable in both product and timeline. So juxtaposing that to 2014, I had a hard time getting excited about it.
Yeah, what irritated me the most about the report that I saw reporting on Ming-Chi Kuo's prognostications for 2014 was him described as mostly accurate. Look, it's a guessing game, and just because it comes from the Mystic Orient doesn't mean that it's any smarter than or more insightful than anyone else. This is the same thing that I used to rail about on the Angry Mac Bastards podcast. This stuff used to really irritate the hell out of me. Look, everybody wants to write Apple headlines. Everybody wants to have a juicy story, and there's nothing wrong with fantasizing about what's coming. But the fact of the matter is, analysts aren't in a much better position to do this than the rest of us. They have access to certain types of data that might lead them down certain paths, but they really, he's no different than Gene Munster, who's endlessly been talking about an Apple TV now for years.
You predicted every year, Peter. 1 year you will be right.
1 year you will be right. It wasn't a big guess to go from FireWire 400 to FireWire 800 back in the day, right? So, whatever.
He's taking issue with me in the chat room. He's saying that he's very accurate, that he's got a very accurate track record, and the 13-inch MacBook Pro did get thinner. As he gets closer to the release dates, I think his monthly statements are better than his roadmaps, just because it's really hard this far out to predict anything, for anybody. And I'm not talking about him. He's just doing his job. This is the job that he is hired to do. This is a job he has to do.
Yeah.
I'm just talking about how they get judged in the Apple reporting space, and the roadmaps I think historically are more problematic than his monthly things. And to Peter's point about Asia, so what happens is a lot of people check with supply chain sources because Apple manufactures a lot of their stuff in China. The only problem with that, well, there's several problems with that. First is that it's hard to, unless you actually have an inside source, and there are some people who do have inside sources, and who have had incredibly accurate predictions of this kind of stuff. iLounge is a good example of that. 9to5Mac, good example of that. It's hard to distinguish actual products from prototypes because Apple does prototype a lot of stuff, and not all of it makes it into product. But also, if famously Apple orders a bunch of 27-inch screens, that's not for a television, that's for an iMac. Order 4K panels, that's not for a television, that's for a Thunderbolt display. Tim Cook himself said it's hard to read the tea leaves based on components because there's a lot of things at work, and there's also a lot of manufacturers, and something could look like it's destined for Apple but not be, or look like it's destined for a certain product and not be. But there was some interesting stuff in there that I think is worth talking about. Actually, a couple interesting things. One is this idea of the watch as a fashion piece, and this is interesting to me, Peter, because the logic circuits in my robotic brain go the other direction. They say that the biggest market opportunity is for more like a band, for something that is not fashion, that complements more than clashes it. For example, if I'm Kevin Mitchelluk and I have 3 or 4 Panerais on my wrist, I don't want an Apple Watch in there, but I could put an Apple band there, or I could put it on the other wrist. It's not something that will take away from existing fashions or have to compete with them. And also, people can buy a ton more bands than they can buy watches. Watches tend to be more precious things. And one of the rumors he had there is that the product line might start low-ish, but sort of go into multiple thousands of dollars. And nothing is impossible. Never say never again, famous Sean Connery movie. But I have a tough time seeing Apple make a $3,000, $4,000, $5,000 wristwatch.
I do too. I don't think that that's going to happen. I think it's ludicrous even to consider it as a possibility.
So I say that, but there are all these Yves Saint Laurent hires, these Burberry hires. So I put it this way: if Apple makes a gold or platinum or latinum watch that is $3,000, identical to the low-end watch, but just made of more expensive materials, I can't say that's impossible. I just don't know if that's a good direction for Apple. I
don't think it would be a good direction either. But like I said, it's so beyond the pale. foresee any conceivable future where it could happen.
Could we do this though? So could there be, and I'm not saying now, because one of the things with this is, the speculation. The further you go out, the more fuzzy it can be. Could there be a situation where there's a product line of wearables originally? Maybe 3 years from now, 5 years from now, 10 years from now, where at the very lowest end you have a shuffle kind of device where it's just a band and all it does is sort of like an M7 on your wrist, and then at the high end you have like the Mac Pro price point of iWatches, where it's as powerful as miniaturization technology allows, with the best materials, the most advanced materials, and things that are legitimately expensive to do.
Yeah, I guess no, actually no. You know what? No, just no. We're not talking about Bang & Olufsen here. We're not talking about bespoke electronics that only the top part of the 1% can afford to use. It's ridiculous. It's ridiculous. Whatever Apple develops, it's going to be a consumer electronic. It's going to be a product that, by and large, people with normal amounts of income are going to be able to, well, not normal amounts, but people in their target market are going to be able to afford. A $650 smartphone is something that's built into the budget of a lot of people around the world right now. It's something that people expect that they have to buy every year or two, and they figure out different ways to do it. Maybe they'll spend cash for it. Maybe they'll put it on a credit card and pay it off piece by piece. Maybe they'll go with their subsidy plan if they're in an area like North America that has vendors who do that. Whatever the case, people have got it in their minds that they need to spend money on these items. But talking about a luxury, or a high-end wearable from Apple, I think is missing the idea of what Apple does, more than anything.
Yeah, I don't disagree with any of that. I mean, like I said, there's always an outside chance that there'll be the iPod Hi-Fi of watches produced that gets quickly, end-of-lined, or the buttonless shuffle. There's always a chance of a bad idea.
Rene, the iPod Hi-Fi is a damn good piece of equipment. Still very useful if you've got an Airport Express.
I don't disagree with that, but it did not turn out to be the mass market success that Apple hoped it would be.
I wonder how much of a mass market success Apple really expected it to be, because they knew that there were products that were going to crowd that marketplace very quickly. I think they used that as a way of sort of showing the way for other vendors to come out with their products. But maybe I'm completely wrong. But yet the difference with an iPhone, the difference with an iWearable is that other vendors aren't going to be making them for Apple. This isn't a product that is necessarily going to translate into an opportunity for third parties. This is something that Apple has to produce. Apple has to sell a lot of them to a lot of people in order to make money off of it.
That's exactly right, and that's where I agree with you, because I don't see the market for a high-end fashion piece from Apple, at least not Apple's market. Apple didn't make a Vertu watch. They didn't take a Vertu phone. They didn't take a traditional phone and put a bunch of fancy materials on it and try to sell it. And I don't think they'll take a smartwatch and put a bunch of fancy materials on it and try to sell it. They have made their money by making affordable luxury, not premium luxury, where anybody can get not anybody, but most people, hundreds of millions of people can get a great phone from Apple, a great tablet from Apple, even a great computer like the MacBook Air from Apple. I don't see that market for high-end wearables. Friend of the show Ben Beharin has run the numbers, and when you look at how many they would have to sell at what kind of margin, it's ludicrous to think that is an Apple-style business.
Mm-hmm, absolutely.
So yeah, see, the thing for me is I don't even want to watch from Apple. I would much rather have the iPhone is not a phone. It is a pocket computer that has a phone app on it, and I would much rather Apple invest their future in wearable computers that have a watch app on them, because it won't be today and it won't be tomorrow, but at some point it might be possible to have a wearable as a primary computing platform. Figure out Siri, figure out gestures, figure out whatever sort of interface it takes to get beyond the size of the device. That's all Apple has ever done. All Apple has ever done is make computing platforms more mainstream, more accessible, and more portable. And I don't know. I don't see them deviating from that, and I don't think it would be successful if they deviated from that.
I'm just waiting for the iBatarang.
At least it comes back to you.
Exactly.
All right, so that was on the phone, and there was some other stuff in there, like two different sizes of OLED displays. Tim Cook himself has poo-pooed OLED displays because of their technology. They are ultra low power, but the other thing with a watch is that a normal watch is on all the time. You just turn your wrist and you see it. And even OLED is not power efficient enough to run it all the time. Even e-ink is not power efficient enough to run all the time because you would need a backlight for certain situations. So there's huge amounts of technology gaps. And the one thing I don't hope, what I really, really hope, Peter, is that all these investors and all these media types aren't rushing Apple. And it's strange to think of Apple being rushed, but given the pressure they're on with this, oh, Tim Cook hasn't innovated, Apple's lost everything, they're nothing without Steve Jobs. Apple has been so good at avoiding the early adopter phase of any product. They waited a long time to put out a phone. They waited a decade to put out a tablet. I hope they don't go to market too early. And we see this in our comments. Why is Apple waiting so long on a watch? Where's the watch? I want the watch now. I would not have wanted a 2006 iPhone or a 2008 iPad because they would have been crappy products. And I don't want an iWatch before it's ready.
Well, you said it in your editorial this morning, Rene. You know, right now wearables are at the handspring visor stage of evolution, if that. You know, it's still such an edge case market that I think that Apple is very smart to take a back seat and let others, you know, sort of figure out where the minefields are. You know, this is something that even consumers themselves don't much latch on to. You know, you can get a Samsung Galaxy Gear pretty cheap off the used market right now. Not to mention fitness wearables. More people than don't stop using fitness wearables after about 6 months. You know, they just don't get into the habit of using them anymore. So I think that Apple is smart to take a cautious approach here and figure out where exactly the market is going to be before it can enter with something that's actually meaningful. And you know that's the thing about Apple products, is that Apple has to have a reason to make them. Me Too is never a reason that Apple is competing in any of the markets that it competes in. It does so because it's got a technology, it's got a presentation of that technology that it thinks is truly innovative and something that can really help people in the way that they work. Can an iWatch or some sort of iWearable do that? Yes. I'm hoping for an iPocket fob because I think that should come back. That whole sort of, you know, Edwardian look with the vest and the pocket fob should come back.
Yeah, Revenge of the Nerd style.
Yeah, well, I don't know. I was thinking more Boyd Crowder from Justified style.
All right, nice. So moving on, they also Quo also had some stuff about the iPhone. Now, I have only heard about one bigger iPhone this year, but there have been persistent rumors of more than one. So I don't know if I'm just not completely informed, or Apple's not considering the bigger one a phone, but maybe more like a phablet or a third category device, or it's coming in future years and not this year. But the rumor here is a 4.7-inch iPhone and a 5.5-inch iPhone phablet sort of device. I'm not adverse to those products. I think, and we've talked about this on previous shows, I think the time is ripe for Apple to make a larger screen phone because they own now 85% of the premium phone market. They've got just about anybody who wants iOS on a 4-inch phone, and the growth opportunity for them here is that other 15% who simply want a larger screen. And it's not outside the realm of possibility for Apple to do that. It fixes a lot of problems for them. 5.5 I'm not adverse to either, because phones are becoming so capable they can be the primary computing platform for a much larger swath of people. And when they are that platform, and you only want to carry one device, larger screens can be a trade-off that you're willing to make. The one part that didn't ring true for me, Peter, was two different screen resolutions, because screen resolution transition is hard, and Apple's been very careful to go step by step. They went to Retina with the iPhone 4. They went to 16:9 with the iPhone 5. I can see them going to 1080p for an iPhone 6 and a 5.5-inch iPhone or iPhablet, whatever the hell you want to call it. I just don't see them splitting the resolution up to make different sized screens for it.
Yeah, exactly. I think that that a larger. Let me say this from the start, Rene. I will get a larger iPhone if Apple releases one.
Me too.
I would love to get a 5.5-inch iPhone. I would love it if the experience of using that 5.5-inch iPhone was not substantially different than using the smaller iPhone. In terms of how it works and what its spec is. I would love it if Apple kept the spec on both those devices the same, kind of like they did with the iPad Air and the iPad Mini with Retina display.
Yeah, exactly.
It would be great to have just a choice of sizes as opposed to an actual spec difference, and let that be, this year's choice for phones, instead of doing another iPhone 5S, iPhone 5C sort of bifurcation of the product line.
Yeah, I think that's very apt, and I think that a couple things. First, more pixels means the potential for a higher level of software, just like the iPad had a higher level of software than the iPhone, because you can put more stuff on screen. But also, HTC has got a 4.7-inch 1080p phone on the market. The HTC One M7 from last year already did that. And then if you scale that up to 5.5, you have one that's 400 something and one that's 300 something DPI. Both are well within Retina range. Both are simply one new display target for developers. A lot of people talk about auto layout as if it fixes all these problems. Auto layout is just a marketing name. Auto layout does not solve all of these problems. So that would behoove me. I think eventually we'll see that there's a range of display sizes along the mobile spectrum where you have something like a 3.5 or 4-inch iPhone on the small side and right before a MacBook Air on the large side, and you can fit in things like a 4-inch, 5-inch, even 6-inch iPhone, 7 and 8, even 8 and 10, even 12-inch iPads, and you could fit in something like an iPad with a removable keyboard if you really want to, and before you get to the MacBook Air. And I think it's just a matter of time before Apple has, like they do with two sizes of iPad, two sizes of MacBook Air, two sizes of MacBook Pro, those two sizes of iPhone to better fill that spectrum.
Yeah, absolutely. No disagreement whatsoever.
So I think those rumors, again, I've only heard of one of them so far, and I don't know if it's unrealistic. The one thing is that one was coming much later in the year. I can see them shipping one later in the year if it's just not ready yet, the way the iPad Retina Mini shipped a little bit later than the iPad Air, but they would announce them at the same time. I don't see a situation where Apple would ever announce a second iPhone later than the first one.
Yeah, I don't necessarily see a larger iPhone cannibalizing the sale of small ones, but maybe I'm reading it wrong. Maybe there is a really large group of users who are iPhone users and new iPhone customers who would like to get a larger device. But I suspect it's a growth market for Apple as opposed to, something that would actually, impact sales of their smaller product.
There was also one of the last rumors is that there would be a Sapphire display, but only on the 64-gigabyte iPad, and I don't know what to make of that. I want a 128-gigabyte iPad, especially if it's phablet-sized, so I just don't even want to process that.
Why would it only be on that one particular model? That just doesn't make much sense to me.
Higher, premium, but yeah, it makes no sense to me either. Apple TV rumors, fairly consistent with what we've heard previously, just a better box because it'll be able to do more things. Maybe a game store. My thinking on this has not changed much since the last time we spoke about it. I'd like to see a beefier Apple. I mean, the only thing that's changed, I guess, and I think we also talked about this last week, is Fire TV, and there's going to be a new Google TV, and apparently the new Google TV will also play games. I think it's an area that's well worth exploiting given the success of iOS games over AirPlay and just iOS games in general, so give it to me.
I have to admit I'm very interested in Fire TV. It seems like a really cool product, and using the SteelSeries Stratus game controller with an iPhone and an iPad, being able to play with it a little bit on Apple TV was kind of a revelation for me about how cool iOS gaming really could be on the Apple TV if Apple manages the experience right. I would love to see that happen. I hope it's not just wishful thinking on my part to think that that's something that Apple's got in store for the Apple TV with its next generation.
Yeah, so give me all that stuff. The other thing that's still of interest to me is that 12-inch Retina MacBook Air, because it harkens me back to the 12-inch old MacBook, was it called a PowerBook or Titanium Book? I forget what its branding.
The last 12-inch, I think, was a PowerBook G4, a 12-inch PowerBook G4.
That was a nice size. The 11-inch is still, I know Jim Dalrymple uses one, and that's a much bigger diversity than what I'm talking about, but it's still a little bit too small for me. The 13-inch could be a little bit more compact, and I really want Retina now. I know my eyes are spoiled, but I want it.
Dalrymple uses the 11-inch because it gives him enough room to keep a Heineken on his stomach shelf when he sits down, so and still be able to work. So, he's kind of a special case. Look, I don't know that a 12-inch really makes a lot of sense for me. What I do know is this: the MacBook 13-inch size is the most crowded, or the 13-inch laptop size is the most crowded segment of Apple's entire product market. Right? We've got so many devices bunched up against this particular spec. It's ridiculous. You've got the standard 13-inch MacBook Pro, which, as far as I'm concerned, has got to go away this year. The thing was
a vestigial product.
It's a vestigial product that was left over from 2012, went into 2013. The MD101 is a solid seller. I can tell you that as somebody who works at an Apple reseller. It is a solid seller in and out because it's got a lot of storage capability, and people like the fact that it's got an internal drive still. They see it as a good value compared to the Retina MacBook Pro, which has better specs but less storage capacity, and that scares them. So how Apple would differentiate a 12-inch product and where that would fit into the matrix, I'm a little less clear on. Would it replace the MacBook Pro? If so, how would it entice people to go with that standard MacBook Pro?
Well, I have a couple of questions, and you're a good person to answer this because Apple's sizes aren't really their sizes. So the 11-inch MacBook Pro is really like 11.7 or something.
11.7, yeah, and it's a different form factor or a different aspect ratio than the other screens.
Yeah, and the other ones are likewise. Like there's a lot of dropped decimals in there, so I don't know if 12 is just someone rounding up instead of rounding down or whatever. I do think that they will have to change the. I know they tried for a long time to make a Retina MacBook Air, and battery was never their friend. And yes, maybe Haswell helps, Broadwell will certainly help, but a design that lets them put more battery in would be beneficial. And I don't know if you could give it the current Air name because it won't be tapered. But the idea of an ultra portable, the only thing that stops me kind of cold, Peter, is this thing about no fan and no clicky trackpad.
Well, there's always got to be a few little tidbits in there that don't make much sense at the time. So I wouldn't get too caught up in that. I'm thinking more along the lines of what is this product going to do that differentiates it significantly from what's already available? What gap does Apple have?
What's its reason for being?
What's its reason for being exactly? And until I can understand that, I'm afraid the future is unclear for me.
All right, so the only thing that I can think of is that the Retina MacBook Pro 13-inch is the 13-inch MacBook Air, and the only way they can do an 11-inch Retina MacBook Air is to change the form factor slightly, and that's what's being reported as the 12-inch new machine.
Okay, yeah, it starts to fall into place.
All right, so moving on, the other rumor that's been catching up some speed lately, Peter, something more squarely in your wheelhouse, and that is the updated design for OS X 10.10 Syrah. Now, last year at WWDC, Peter and I were both there, and one of the rumors going around is that they wanted to update Mavericks to be more like iOS, not more like, but they wanted to update Mavericks to be, have more depth, have more deference, have more clarity, but they just didn't have the manpower because getting iOS 7 out the door was such a Herculean task. So I don't think it's surprising that OS X 10.10 is getting the attention it deserves this year. I just don't know how much we can base that on iOS 7 yet.
Yeah, I mean, there are a lot of good reasons to think that Apple wants to do this, though. And one of the main ones is the halo effect that draws a lot of new blood into OS X every year. People walk into Apple retail stores and other places to buy their products, and they already have an experience with an iPad or an iPhone, or for that matter, an Android product. Or even a Windows product, and they want a new computer, and they're not familiar with OS X, but they are familiar with those other things. The more consistent you can make that visual experience for them, the easier the transition is going to be. So it only makes sense that Apple would want to get 10.10 somewhat visually consistent with iOS 7. I think it makes a lot of sense. And, longtime Mac users are, throwing their hands up saying, no, it's yet another step towards the iOSification of the Mac. Really, it is, yeah, exactly. But we've been through this before. When 10 originally came out, when it was originally introduced back in 2000, when OS 10 was originally introduced, Apple, Steve Jobs at the time made a big deal about its lickable Aqua interface. Aqua didn't last forever. Things changed over the course of OS 10, and of course, going from the visual
Titanium
interface
didn't last forever.
Titanium didn't last forever, exactly. Mac, for that matter, classic Mac OS to OS 10 was a huge transition. But you know what? We've managed. So it's not an indication that OS 10 and iOS are headed towards any specific singularity, with a flatter visual interface being used. I think that it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, it also, for example, Peter, if you go to Game Center on Mavericks, it is still befestered with green felt. I don't know if befestered is a word, but it sounds appropriate.
It is one of the last bastions of skeuomorphism in OS 10. Yes.
Yeah, and there's a lot of areas where it could. I mean, right now there is still Mavericks just feels like it's got an idea that's not finished. Like there's vertical versus horizontal controls. There's a little bit of Aqua left. There's a little bit of what they were doing in Snow Leopard there. There's a little bit of the Back to My Mac stuff, which did introduce a lot more skeuomorphism. It just seems like there's a lot of jumbled ideas there, and if nothing else, a singular design vision for OS 10 the way there is for iOS, I think would be an improvement.
Yeah, exactly. Mavericks, for all of its benefits, for all of its under-the-hood improvements, did have kind of a patchwork quilt feel to it. So it would be nice to get that wrangled in this year's release.
All right, so the last kind of thing I want to talk to you about was a few apps that some of them we talked about before, some are getting more attention. Ali did a review for the Office apps, Office for iPad for us, and she generally liked them, and that seems to be the consensus. The consensus seems to be that Microsoft did a very good job, and if you are an Office user, a 365 subscriber, someone for whom those applications are important, you're going to really like the iPad versions.
Yeah, absolutely. And no faulting you if you do. I personally can't get into using the iPad as a productivity tool. It just doesn't make a lot of sense for how I use the iPad. But if it makes sense for you, if you're an Office 365 subscriber, it's going to cost you $10 a month. You can have Office installed on up to 5 Macs and 5 iPads. It makes a lot of sense for a lot of people to have that because they want that ability to, just sort of seamlessly integrate their existing Microsoft workflow into their digital life with their iPad. I think it's great that it's there. I have some misgivings about putting everything that I need that's meaningful in that software in OneDrive's hands, though. And this is the thing that bugs me about all this stuff is that, Apple wants me to use iCloud. Microsoft wants me to use OneDrive. Google wants me to use its stuff, and so on.
The nerds want you to use Dropbox.
Yeah, come on, guys, give me a break. How many different workflows do I have to develop just to get my damn work done?
I think there's one, like you, I prefer doing, if I'm doing a ton of writing, I'm doing it on a MacBook, but there have been times when either I'm traveling or I've used my MacBook into decharged oblivion where I like the ability to just pull out my iPad because it is a nice big screen and make a couple much needed corrections, without having to worry about finding an outlet or finding my MacBook or anything like that. So I think even if you don't think you'll need it, it's nice to have it. It's a nice backup insurance policy.
Yeah, absolutely. If you need it, and if it's a way that you're accustomed to working, then it makes sense.
You also did a good piece on iWork and how Apple is, like Final Cut Pro 10, like iMovie 10, they're bringing back the features that they stripped out in order to make it a new product.
They are indeed. This has been a long row for Apple to hoe. It's been about 6 months that Apple has been working through some of the problems that iWork had on OS 10 during its initial release. Rewinding to last fall, when Apple released iWork for OS 10, the new iWork applications for OS 10, which they made free, if you've had them before, you can upgrade for free. If you get a new machine, you get them for free. They're really, really nice applications, but they're not the applications that they replace. There's a lot of difference in code. A lot of that has to do with Apple's desire to have sort of a uniform workflow between OS X and iOS, and it makes a lot of sense if you're plugged into that, if you've got your iPad and if you've got your Mac, just like it does with Microsoft Office and Office 365. But there was a lot that Apple pulled out of there too, and the main thing that many of the people I've been talking to have been complaining about is an absence of workflow automation tools.
And they lost their beret-wearing Sal Soghoian minds.
They did indeed. Sal Soghoian, Apple's AppleScript daddy. AppleScript is a very powerful workflow automation feature that many Mac users depend on.
Publications too.
Publications, absolutely. Many Mac-using businesses depend on. That was gutted in those in those previously updated iWork apps, and it really affected the workflow of a lot of people. Fortunately, Apple left the old applications in place, so there was no compelling reason for you to go to the new versions, but Apple has been steadily improving the Mavericks iWork apps since then, and we're not necessarily at parity. I don't think with Pages we're ever going to be at parity because the product works so fundamentally differently than it used to, but we're at a point now where workflow automation, there's no question, is usable in the new versions of the iWork apps. Having said that, Apple's still got a lot of work to do.
Yeah, it's not over.
No, it isn't. So it's a work in progress, and hopefully we'll see some more movement from Apple with 10.10 on that count too.
The other big app, so Microsoft got Office to iPad. Adobe has now brought Lightroom to iPad. Richard Devine did a full walkthrough for us. I got to sit in on a product briefing with them, and I was really impressed. I was not a fan of Photoshop for iPad. I thought that its user interface was obscure, impenetrable maybe. What they've done with Lightroom, I think is really, really good. If you're a Lightroom user and you have that, you're using it, especially Creative Cloud, they have a $10 special right now where you can subscribe to it. You can get a really powerful round-tripping workflow in there. So you can take your photos, you can load them up on Lightroom, you can see them on the iPad, you can quickly go through them and mark them up, mark them down. I think this was a job well done.
I do too, and in some ways I'm actually more excited about Lightroom for iPad than I am about Office for iPad.
Me too.
But that I think probably just has a lot more to do with how we use our stuff than people who enjoy Office. But anyway, Lightroom for iPad, it has me very happy on one hand because it's an excellent tool, and as a Creative Cloud subscriber, I'm already dialed into that suite of software and how that whole thing works, and it's got excellent connectivity between itself and Photoshop on the Mac. It's very easy to bring the photos that you've collected, that you might have done some editing on already, into Photoshop for final touch-ups. That's great stuff. It makes me sad that Apple isn't there with either iPhoto or Aperture.
Yes.
Aperture is an excellent tool, very comparable to Lightroom, but it's only on OS X. Apple's built some of the same features that Aperture has into iPhoto for iOS, but iPhoto for iOS is squarely an application for consumers. It's not professional grade. I really get the sense using it that Lightroom for iPad is professional grade photo software. It's something that you could really incorporate into a professional photographic workflow with some great results, and would make your life a lot easier. iPhoto just isn't there.
Yeah, the things for me that makes Lightroom so good is that you can put full quality raw images on your Mac. They get synced up to Adobe's cloud. Adobe generates lower file size or smaller, more efficient JPEG versions, which then get pushed to your iPad. But all the edits you do on the iPad are just tracks. They become like a delta file, a bit differential, and then those are pushed back. So you don't lose anything. You can edit it on the iPad, and every one of those changes will get pushed back to a version that exists on your computer, and that's the round-tripping workflow I mentioned. That's where I think you're exactly right. I can't call Aperture abandonware. It's more like stutterware where Apple updates it every once in a while and then ignores it for a time. But they don't have anything like this sort of cloud integration. And one of my big wishes for iCloud version 3.0, whatever it is that'll come with iOS 8, is that Apple takes photography on the cloud more seriously and lets us just store all our stuff up on the cloud and have it on all our devices, not for 30 days, not for 1,000 photos, not in the kind of quirky, stressful way it is now, but just a really good photo management solution with Aperture for iOS tied into it.
You know, I get that the cloud is not Apple's first language, or even where Apple, I think, would prefer to invest a lot of its time and effort. But it's got to happen, you know. And Apple is so parsimonious with the amount of storage that they give you in iCloud. It really kind of makes it ridiculous, especially when you compare it to what you're getting with Google. But the difference is, you know, with Apple, your data is your data, so that's certainly worth it to some people.
I agree with that. I just think that if I do trust my stuff to a cloud, Apple is one of the clouds I trust because they are currently not productizing my data.
Well, and this goes back to what I was saying before about, you know, using OneDrive for my office stuff and using Google for their stuff and so on. I would prefer to know. I would prefer to keep my data where I can see it.
Speaking of which, Dropbox announced Carousel yesterday, so all your photos has been theirs. And I think Mailbox is coming for the Mac. Peter?
Now, Mailbox is something that you and Allie have expressed some excitement about.
I don't use it. I don't use it because I like a unified inbox that has my not my mobile me, see how old I am, my iCloud and my Google accounts all in one. So I am a Mail.app user. Allie is a Mailbox user, though. She likes it. Mailbox, for people who don't mind having their stuff stored in the cloud and having clever things done to it on the cloud, I think Mailbox is a good solution.
Yeah. Okay. All right. I've got to say I stick with Mail as well. I bitch about it. I don't think that Apple's Mail app on OS X is nearly as good as it needs to be.
No.
But I sort of begrudgingly deal with it, and you know.
The devil I know, Peter.
Well, I switched to it from Entourage. You know,
okay.
Entourage put me through the tortures of the damned one too many times, having to rebuild a database, and I haven't had that problem in Apple's Mail app. But I do have to say that Mail in Mavericks is probably the worst shape I've seen Mail in some time. I really hope that whoever was working on Mail has either come to Jesus or gotten fired.
All right.
You know, for 10.10, because things have to improve with Syrah.
Okay, I loved your title, by the way, but before you changed it, Que Sera. Hope that's still in the slug.
You know, I just want it to be Shiraz. I like Shiraz better than Syrah. What can I say?
Who was it? Someone in our chat room just mentioned, Neil Douglas just mentioned the T-Mobile deals, and I'll get a plug-in for those. Verizon and T-Mobile are announcing some stuff today. I don't have all the details, but it's up on iMore. But I think T-Mobile's was that they're selling the LTE version of the iPad for the same price as the Wi-Fi version, which is a pretty good deal.
Definitely.
The last thing I want to talk about, Peter, is Monument Valley is costing me sleep.
Monument Valley, what a great little game, huh?
It's like Threes in that you just pay for it. There's no in-app purchase. There's no subscription. You give the guy you give the developer a couple bucks. They give you a fantastic experience. Some people complain it's not long enough. It's a couple bucks. You know, that's less than a fancy drink that lasts you 20 minutes at a coffee shop. It's an Escher-esque game where you bring your little character along these multi-dimensional pathways, and it is, for me, the music is fantastic, the graphics are delightful, and I love that games like Threes and this are coming out because they fly in the face of the more obnoxious trends in gaming.
Yeah, Monument Valley was built using middleware from Unity Technologies as well. You know, it's a great example of what the Unity engine can do really, really well in the right hands. It's a really neat piece of work. You know, I have to hand it to the guys at Cult of Mac. They posted a really great article about Monument Valley, and definitely folks should check it out if they get a chance.
Yeah, it's all the sketches from the artist, basically the level designs and things like that, and it's just a beautiful game.
Yeah, it really is. It's very well done. So if you haven't downloaded Monument Valley and you're looking for a solid, what is it, $3.99, I think,
Yeah.
expense on the App Store, please check it out.
And I also heard, Peter, that if you're still angry over the current version of Sims, you can finally get the original on your Mac.
That's right. Yeah. Now the Sims 4 has been around since 2003, right? It came out for the Mac in 2003 as well. Aspire Media has brought it back. I think it's partly, as a reaction to all the negative publicity around EA's reworked version of SimCity, which came out last year. For the longest time, for a year, you had to connect to their servers in order to play it. You had no sort of offline play. So if you're looking for the classic SimCity experience, you can get SimCity 4 again. It's been remastered for new Macs, and it's available through the Mac App Store. It'll set you back $20, so you can download it and play to your heart's content.
$22,003 or $20 in modern currency?
$20 in modern currency. $20 is the coin of the realm.
Nice. Peter, thank you so much. If people are interested in reading those editorials you mentioned in your further coverage, where can they find you?
They can find me on iMore.com and on the Twitters at Flarg, F-L-A-R-G-H.
That's your kaiju name.
That is my kaiju name.
You can find me at Rene Ritchie on all the social things. You can also find me at iMore.com and Mobile Nations. If you haven't already, please go to iMore.com/podcast. We put out a ton of really great stuff. On Debug this week, just went up yesterday, we have Ken Ferry, who not only made the awesome new app, Understudy for iPad, but in his previous life, he worked on Cocoa and on Auto Layout and on Passbook at Apple, and he talks about all those projects and a lot of really cool stories that go along with them. We have Iterate for designers there. We have Zen and Tech. Georgia spoke about panic attacks this week. It's our mobile lifestyle show. There's a lot of good stuff there. I do have good news too, Peter. We finally got a new host for our videos, so the iMore show will be returning to iTunes Video, hopefully by the next show.
How long has it been now? Almost 2 months, right?
Yeah. Stuff turns out to be hard.
Well, yeah, exactly. So sorry about that, folks, but I'm very happy to hear it.
Awesome. And again, if you can join us live, that's always the best way. We have the most handsome, most well-informed, smartest chat room in the business. We're here every Thursday, 1 p.m. Pacific, 4 p.m. Eastern, 9 p.m. British Summer Time. If not, all the shows are available for you on YouTube for the videos, on iTunes or RSS for the audio, and soon to be returning RSS and iTunes for the video. Peter, have a wonderful rest of your day.
You too, Rene.
Thank you, chat room.